I think we can go ahead and start, and people can join in as they want. So, yeah, a very good evening to one and all present here. I'm Aditya K, and along with Aishwarya Arkati and Sana Sultana, will be the host for today's webinar. As you all are aware, we are here on the occasion of World Breastfeeding Week. Breastfeeding is the best gift a mother can give to a child and herself. It is the best source of nutrition for a child. The World Breastfeeding Week is celebrated every year from August 1st to August 7th to encourage and support women to ensure their child has the best nutrition and all-round development. History dates back to the 1990 when the World Health Organization and the United Nations Children's Emergency Fund created a memorandum to promote and support breastfeeding. Ever since then, the number of countries participating has been increasing. As future healthcare professionals, it is essential that we truly understand the importance of breastfeeding and have sound knowledge so as to enable a mother to pass through one of her best phases of her life with ease. It is my privilege to introduce to all of you our speaker for the day, Dr. Priyadarshini Chidambaram, an assistant professor of the community medicine at Ramaya Medical College, Bangalore. She's a gold medalist in public health from Madras Medical College and the recipient of the 2018 KACH Millennium Award for the Best Faculty Presentation, awarded by the Karnataka Association for Community Health. She has keen interest in promoting gender studies in medicine and is pursuing her PhD in public health from Ramaya University for Applied Sciences. She's coordinated the World Breastfeeding Week awareness last year at RMC, which was awarded as one of the best awareness campaigns in the country by the Breastfeeding Promotion Network of India. Ma'am, it is our honor to have you on board. Let us now begin. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Aditya, and thank you for the entire coordinating team and the students who are here today for this particular webinar. Just before I start, I'm clear, isn't it, Aditya? It's fine?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
So I wanted to tell all of you, I'm sure all of you students, they're mostly medical students, isn't it? Here. So what I want to say is, I'm not going to make it into another community medicine class or into another pediatrics class. I really want it to be something practical and something that will really be useful for you to pass it down to your own, your patients who come to you or other mothers and family members who seek your advice. Let me just share the screen. Okay, so I hope my PowerPoint is visible. So yes. Thank you. So this is how I'm going to actually talk about my topic today. I'm going to talk about why we should actually be debating about breastfeeding. Why is it important that we have this week at all? And ideally, as a physician, which side should we be on? And as any person, should we be for the, for side or against the side of breastfeeding? And I'm going to just talk about, as a physician, the kind of on within us and the various myths that are there surrounding breastfeeding and how we can support breastfeeding. And I want to talk to you all a little about my journey as well, because there I would like to tell you how unprepared I was, though I'm a physician and I'm a community physician, and still how I needed to be supported in my journey as well. So the whole idea about this talk is to ensure that at the end of the talk, I'll have some non-judgmental and supportive physicians who share social responsibility to promote breastfeeding and will safeguard the breastfeeding diet, that is the mother and the child. Okay, so just to start off with, to give you a real fact about why we're talking about breastfeeding today, 3 in 5 babies are not breastfed in the first hour of life, as per our WHO recommendation. And almost 2/3 of children are not exclusively breastfed for 6 months. And by just the simple act of breastfeeding for the first 2 years of life, 0.8 million children can actually be saved in a year from all kinds of mortality. So that's the kind of magnitude we're seeing with relation to a very small thing such as initiating breastfeeding. So breastfeeding is such a natural phenomena, but it's always a complicated, it's always looked at something that's complicated as a struggle, and people who are breastfed are constantly judged, either for breastfeeding or not breastfeeding. So there's a whole debate on whether we should need to promote breastfeeding or we need to promote bottle feeding, formula feeding, which is better. So this has been going on since for long, but since the 1930s, 1940s, when formula milk became a big thing, breast milk was frowned upon. And there's a lot of marketing for these breast milk substitutes in a huge way, especially if you see the generation that currently recommends formula feeding is probably, say, mothers, our mothers or our grandparents, probably because during their period, this aggressive marketing went on. So they still carry these notions that probably breast milk substitutes are better. And there is also this notion that women in the workforce cannot breastfeed, and not breastfeeding is kind of like liberating women, and they can be more in the workforce. And there's also this whole debate on should breastfeeding in public be encouraged. So I just want to say, when I was younger, probably when I was 5, 6, so I have a gynecologist mom. So every time I've been in her clinic, I've seen women who would sit in the waiting room and breastfeed without feeling any kind of shame or embarrassment. But now the whole point of, if you see a woman breastfeeding in public, it's seen as such a shameful act. But what the woman is just trying to do is feed her child, you know. And the whole debate of how long should, even if a woman chooses to breastfeed, how long she should. So there's this whole concept of extended breastfeeding. So most often, if a woman breastfeeds for more than 6 months, it's not seen as a very healthy sign. So taking in all this into account, should women breastfeed or not? So I think you might have all have your own opinions on which to choose in each of these, in each of these topics. But let me tell you. So I think we need to pick the right side, and let's see how to do that. So this World Breastfeeding Week was started, the whole celebration, observation of this World Breastfeeding Week started in 1992. And it was to generate public awareness in support for breastfeeding. So this 1992, the August 1st, actually marks the anniversary of the Innocenti Declaration. So this declaration called for governments to establish national breastfeeding coordinators and committees and to ensure appropriate maternity services. I'm going to just, for a second, ask if my dog is disturbing everyone. Is it too loud? It's okay? All right. So then it also tried to ensure appropriate maternity services. So there's the baby-friendly hospital initiative was pushed forward by this particular declaration. And there was a renewed effort to give effect to the International Code of Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. So this also called for to enact any kind of imaginative legislation that will enable and help and protect breastfeeding rights of working women. Okay, so currently the whole campaign has been modified in such a way that the sustainable development goals also have been taken into account. So we should all know that breastfeeding is not just about nutrition or survival of the child, it also amounts to sustainable development of our planet. So the World Alliance for Breastfeeding Action began to align its whole breastfeeding policy to sustainable development. So directly and indirectly to 4 main thematic areas we can take into, we can fit in the breastfeeding. So that includes nutrition, food security and poverty reduction, survival, health and well-being, environment and climate change, and also to women's productivity and employment. So breastfeeding and SDG have an intersection at these 4 goals, mainly. Okay. So what are the main recommendations with regards to breastfeeding? So I think you would all know that breastfeeding must be initiated within 1 hour of delivery. So be it a normal delivery or vaginal delivery or a cesarean section, within 1 hour of delivery, the mother needs to start initiating breastfeeding. And exclusive breastfeeding needs to be carried on for 6 months. So I hope you all know what exclusive breastfeeding means. So I commonly, this is not just an exam question, but I think you, in terms of what you want to advise the mother as well. So which means that the mother is not to give the child anything other than breast milk, not even water, but any kind of recommended medicines, supplementations are allowed, or oral rehydration solutions if necessary. All right, those are allowed. And then at 6 months, so when you're talking about breastfeeding, you don't stop with just talking about breastfeeding. We also need to talk about complementary feeding, because at 6 months, the requirement for nutritional requirement for children increases, and therefore complementary feeding appropriately needs to be started after that period. And mothers should be encouraged to continue breastfeeding for 2 years or beyond that as well, for whatever the mother and the child choose to. So talking about, I just want to tell you what are the benefits of breastfeeding. So we all know that there are numerous benefits to the child and mother. So the breast milk is rich in immune factors, and it is tailored nutrition for every child. So if actually there are studies which show that breast milk from each mother differs in composition. It's not like breast milk is uniform for the composition isn't uniform. All right. So it's tailor-made for the requirement of each child. So for premature children, it is different. For a child currently suffering from infection, the breast milk components are different. So the nutrition is very tailor-made for each child. And breast milk ensures that there's decreased incidence of diarrhea, necrotizing enterocolitis, middle ear infections, pneumonia, sudden infant death syndrome, and it also prevents obesity and cardiovascular disease in the long run during adulthood, and ensures that there's decreased incidence of all of these diseases as well, non-communicable disease. And in the mother, a great way to lose pregnancy weight, maybe not for all mothers, but it does help in a great, to a great extent to lose the weight gain during pregnancy. And initiating breastfeeding early helps prevent postpartum hemorrhage as well. And in some women, it may delay the return of fertility. So that is what we call as lactational amenorrhea. So it can help space between pregnancies as well. And for breastfeeding mothers, there is lower risk of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and also cardiovascular disease and osteoporosis as well. So numerous benefits to the mother as well. So it's not just limited to benefits to the child and the mother. It also enables, has other benefits. So to know that you may not have heard of the term warm chain. We've often heard of cold chain, but warm chain is a term used by WHO for which is initiated for thermal control of the newborn. So it refers to a set of procedures which help prevent hypothermia. So one of the components of the warm chain is breastfeeding. And it's so important to initiate this particular, have this link in the chain as well to ensure that the child does not develop hypothermia and has good survival rates. So breastfeeding also promotes bonding between the mother and child. So this whole myth that mothers come out, mothers are naturally bonded with their children does not exist. Sometimes it takes get used to their children and to develop that kind of a bonding. So breastfeeding helps immensely in that. And breast milk comes in ideal temperature. It's at body temperature. So what is suitable for both? It's suitable for the child and in crisis situations as well. When I say crisis, we mean it could be a mass migration movement, you have refugees, you have war. Even in situations of crisis where food can be scarce, breastfeeding will still ensure that nutrition is available to the child. And beyond that, you know, we could probably stop with that, but then it also has so many economic benefits and environmental impact benefits as well. So there are a huge number of review articles which talk about how economically and environmentally breastfeeding benefits us as well. So economically, you know, breast milk is free, and saving, it also helps to save expenses that could be spent on treatment and hospitalization of infants due to infections. And for every $1 that is invested in breastfeeding, we get $35 in economic returns. So this whole formula milk has been, pushed by thorough marketing strategies that people feel unless they are able to afford and give formula milk, they're not, they don't belong to the higher class society, or as though they're poor people. No, absolutely not, you know. And environmental impact of breastfeeding. So we should all remember that for 1 kg of infant formula, more than 4,000 liters of water is required. So can you imagine that, just to produce 1 kg of infant formula? And if people know how much of infant formula is used, maybe over a week, children could consume up to maybe even 2 or 3 boxes, 3 tins of formula feed, you know. So that's the amount of water that actually goes into producing formula. And also bottle feeding is involved in production of waste that is associated with the packaging, processing, transportation, the amount of plastic that's generated. So that is huge. And it also has huge greenhouse gas implications. So for every 1 kg of formula, again, that is being produced, 4 kg of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gases are produced. Okay, so that's the kind of environmental impact it has. And again, one more thing is you also need water to ensure that you're able to give safe formula feeding. So water needs to be sterilized, it should be potable, and it has to be, the equipments that are used for bottle feeding need to be cleaned and sterilized as well. So by breastfeeding, we can ensure that there's huge environmental impact is made. So now, why should physicians actually, have another point of view? Why should we talk about it on World Breastfeeding Week? You obviously have your community medicine classes, you have your pediatrics classes. So why again are we talking about that? Well, very often, having interacted with a lot of physicians, a lot of doctors, and are seeing our superiors, our peers, we all realize that doctors tend to have a patronizing attitude. We tell our patients, unless you do this, it's wrong. I know best, you listen to me. So we tend to have this patronizing attitude. So unless, I think we need to shed that. And if we don't have the right information about breastfeeding, we are going to be really imposing some kind of, a forced habit on them, which may not be good. And even as physicians, I think we have a kind of a cultural bias, as not just as physicians, but as individuals coming from various cultures, and we've seen so much, we bring along our baggage. So we also have a kind of a cultural bias within us. And as physicians, I would say we're not adequately trained. At least I know for a fact that I wasn't adequately trained, not in my undergraduate days. Maybe you had one class on IMNCI, they told you what is proper positioning, what is proper latching, that's all, okay? And most of the knowledge that is acquired by us medical students is very, very lecture-based. You really don't get an opportunity to assess breastfeeding, watch mothers breastfeed. So it's very lecture-based knowledge. And as doctors, we're so used to the biomedical concept. So we can't look beyond that biomedical concept. So that also actually impedes. And if you see breastfeeding, what it requires is a lot of social support. So unless that is there, so how social factors, how environmental factors also affect breastfeeding, we are not aware of that. So therefore, we're very stuck to the biomedical concept. And as physicians, we can be very key influencers, more than what breastfeeding mothers or the family around them want to listen to other people, more than how peers can influence breastfeeding. Doctors have a very important say in how we influence this practice among families. And again, as physicians, there's this whole thing that we are team leaders, we are the top of the health system. So I think we need to lose that a bit as well. And I don't know how many of you are aware, there are people called as lactation consultants. So lactation consultants need not be doctors. So you can have other paramedical people or even lay people who've done other kinds of degrees, trained to be lactation consultants, who will support mothers and who will teach mothers how to breastfeed. And without sounding judgmental, I want to say that, many physicians haven't breastfed themselves, not because they don't want to, or maybe because they didn't have support, maybe because they didn't have adequate knowledge, maybe because they had to return to work early. So nothing wrong, but I'm saying, and it doesn't mean that as young physicians who've never had an opportunity to breastfeed, you cannot advise another mother. That's not true. But we come from a lack of that knowledge or that experience, because the experience is particularly different from what we teach theoretically. Yeah. So I think since all these kind of issues are there, as physicians, we need to challenge our own points of view and think what actually we need to do. So one important thing I wanted to talk about as physicians, what we do not know is about latching. So latching is very, very important, and it's a very basic step in establishing successful breastfeeding. So I wanted to point this out because we talk about positioning, latching, but I don't think people told you why it is really important to focus on latching. So because an improper latch could lead to sore and cracked nipples, which further impedes, the process of breastfeeding. And the sore and cracked nipples can further lead to mastitis and abscess, and they can lead to clogged pores. And eventually, if the latch is improper, it results in inability to draw sufficient milk, or there's poor milk removal by the child as well. And this is more common in children who have tongue tie, who are premature, who may have a cleft lip or cleft palate. So these are things that we need to remember about latching. So I think with latch, the basic things. The child needs to open the mouth wide open. The upper part of the areola should be visible much more than the lower part. And the lips should be averted. These are things we learn. But why we focus on latching is this. Okay, so that is something I wanted to kind of emphasize on. So I'm going to just talk about a little bit of myths and facts regarding breastfeeding. So most of these myths and facts are from UNICEF, but I've also put in some that I've commonly encountered, through my 2 years of this journey, the various things that I've heard as well. So the commonest myth is that breastfeeding is easy. Like I said, it's a natural phenomenon, and most of the children receive breastfeeding as they first feed. So it should be easy, isn't it? It should come naturally. So the fact is not at all. Okay. So it's a very, very, it is pretty complicated, and most mothers do not understand how to breastfeed, and therefore they need to be supported practically, ideally by their family members, by their partners, and also by us physicians. And so this whole thing of separate a newborn and the mother so that the mother can rest is a myth. So we need to ensure that there is a lot of skin-to-skin contact. So this kangaroo mother care need not be only for preterm or premature infants. It has to be practiced for all newborns. It's a way in which we encourage bonding between the mother and child. So these are things you need to keep in mind and keep stressing to the mothers that you will come across, especially when you see mothers in their antenatal period and postnatal period. Keep stressing on these things. Tell them about, find out about their apprehensions and advise them on all of this. And there's a whole thing that if mothers have not established breastfeeding immediately within the first hour or within the first day of birth, it may not be possible for the child to learn latching at all. So initially, as soon as the child is born, the child comes out looking for the mother's breast. So if there is a whole myth that if that is not utilized, then you can never establish breastfeeding. So I want to tell you, this is absolutely not true. Plenty of skin-to-skin contact and attempting to latch as soon as possible, and taking the help of a lactation consultant. I'm not even going to say taking the help of a doctor, a gynecologist, or a lactation consultant, but actually taking the help of a lactation consultant can really help establish breastfeeding. So I think we need to take their help here. And there are actually even places where now they talk about how mothers or families who adopt children can establish, lactation. Maybe not a full-fledged lactation, but mothers who've never given birth can also lactate. So again, one of the myths is that mothers need to wash nipples before breastfeeding. So this reminds me of a study that was presented in our, we had a synopsis presented in our department where one of the postgraduates was actually supposed to find out about postnatal practices. And one of my own colleagues went on about why the student PG needs to add a question on, washing hygiene practices while breastfeeding, and kept emphasizing that nipples need to be washed. Hello, no, not at all. So washing nipples isn't necessary, especially because there is a lot of bacterial content on the mother's breast, which help pass on, enable the child to develop antibodies towards those bacteria, and helps enhance the immune system of the child. All right. So please remember not to emphasize on please wash your breasts or nipples each time before feeding. That is not required. Just basic hygiene, having a bath every day is sufficient, like the general hygiene practices. And most commonly, which I've been told often as well, mothers must drink milk to produce breast milk and to eat plain food while breastfeeding. So whatever you eat will affect the child. So actually, what a postpartum mother needs is actually balanced diet. So anything that everybody else has to have a balanced diet is what a postpartum mother needs as well. Okay, nothing. It doesn't have to be plain food. And there are many places where in the first 2 or 3 days of the immediate postpartum period, the mothers are not given anything to drink. The water is actually restricted. So that is absolutely not true. Mother needs to be well hydrated. And again, myth. Thin mothers, mothers with small breasts, mothers with inverted nipples, flat nipples cannot produce enough milk for the child or will not be able to successfully breastfeed. That's absolutely not true. All mothers can produce enough milk for the requirements of their child. So whatever is the requirement of your child, every mother produces enough milk for her child. So again, if somebody says don't consume too much water, the milk produced will be diluted. Not true. And we should all know breast milk is not produced from what we eat. Breast milk is made out of the blood that circulates in the through the breasts of the mother. All right. So absolutely nothing to do with water that is consumed. A mother needs to ensure that she remains well hydrated, 2 to 3 liters of water at least through the day. Okay. And now in this current scenario, there is so much of apprehensions about should breastfeeding mothers who are COVID positive, should they stop breastfeeding? So you may all be aware, or if you're not, mothers who are COVID positive can continue to breastfeed. They just need to follow 3 W's. So they need to wear a mask regularly while breastfeeding or while they're around the child. And they need to wash their hands regularly, often, and they need to wipe and disinfect high-touch surfaces frequently as well. So even if a mother does not have access to a mask or even a cloth mask, so we don't know the effectiveness of cloth mask, but if she does not have access to a good mask, we still advise her to go ahead and breastfeed. We all know that COVID-19 infection, even if it does occur in the child, it is likely to be mild or asymptomatic. And breast milk by itself does not transmit COVID infection. So go ahead and please ask mothers who are breastfeeding to continue breastfeeding. And if there are mothers who wish to isolate themselves, who are still fear infection, but do not want to stop breastfeeding, what they can do is they can express their breast milk and then they can ask another caregiver to feed their child. So this whole myth of sick mothers should avoid breastfeeding. So very often if mothers fall ill, if mothers have any kind of fever or any kind of illness, they are also asked to avoid breastfeeding by family members. So that is not required. Mothers can continue to breastfeed when they're sick, unless they're very sick that they're unable to physically hold the child and breastfeed. Even then it's possible if a partner or a family member can support the child, the mother can breastfeed. And if a mother can express, you can still feed the expressed milk to the children. So there is no necessity for sick mothers to avoid breastfeeding. Okay. And all right. So, there's a common thing. I don't know if you've noticed, there are people who will say, the child's after a feed doesn't look like the child's stomach is not distended. There is no, it doesn't look like the child is not fed. If they keep talking like that, that's not at all true. You don't check for adequacy of a breastfeed by how much distended an abdomen is. I've heard this very often. So there are no external signs by just looking at the child to say whether the child has been adequately fed. But an adequately fed child will at least urinate 6 to 8 times in a day, a minimum of 6 to 8 times. And the child, most often, if they're adequately breastfed, they just continue to sleep. And there is good weight gain in the long run. Okay? In the long term, you will see adequate weight gain. So those are ways you check for adequacy of breastfeeds, not by seeing if the child's abdomen is distended. So you might think that some of these questions, don't even sound medical, when you look at these myths. But I'm going to tell you what you need to do is, when you are practicing, these are the questions that you're going to get day in and day out. You might think, what is this so absurd? But these kind of myths are so prevalent in society. For all you know, you might have heard some of this and you might have thought it's true as well. And thrown out. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know what that is. So colostrum, which is the thick yellow milk produced right after delivery, is bad for the baby and should be thrown out. So this is not true. So very often this is practiced as well. So we all know that colostrum gives the maximum immunity, and it is full rich in immune factors and helps boost a child's immune system while the immune system is still developing. And very often you should remember that many mothers come and say, my milk has not come in. It's been 2 days, 3 days. The milk hasn't started coming in. And therefore my child, I think, needs to be formula fed. So usually breast milk, maybe for the first 3 to 5 days, you still have only colostrum being produced. And colostrum, the quantity is measured in terms of spoons. So probably 1 or 2 spoons of colostrum come in a day. So that is all that a child needs in the first 3 days to 4 days of life. So if a mother comes saying my milk has not yet come in, please reassure the mother and say that colostrum, it's really, really thick and it's very calorie rich and very energy dense. So go ahead and say, please feed the colostrum to the child. Okay. And it's very rich in immune factors. And okay, so there's this thing that breast milk is not required beyond 6 months. 6 months is at least breastfeed exclusively for 6 months, and then you can shift to other foods. But what we should remember that even beyond 6 months, breast milk forms an important part of nutrition for a child. So for almost half of the nutritional needs, or half or more of the nutritional needs in the next 6 months, from 7 to 12 months, is met by breast milk. And in the second year of life, almost 1/3 of the nutritional requirement is met by breast milk. So even beyond 6 months, breast milk has a lot of benefits, even nutritionally. Okay. Commonly said, if you don't wean a child when the child is young, when the child probably will not recollect being breastfed. If you don't wean at that time, it's going to be very difficult to wean beyond that. But we should remember that weaning is different for each diet, for each mother and child. And the decision to breastfeed and to continue breastfeed for how long should be determined together by the mother and child. So it might sound a little absurd saying, child determining breastfeeding. But this is what UNICEF itself says. So the mother and child together determine when they are ready to stop breastfeeding. Okay. So mothers, for some reasons, may want to stop breastfeeding. Maybe they think 2 years is enough, but it should not be anybody else's problem. It's the mother and the child. It's their problem alone and nobody else's. Okay. And commonly we've heard breastfed children are affected psychologically. They're very clingy, or they may have some kind of, they remember breastfeeding, and, all kinds of myths regarding breastfed babies, especially who are breastfed for an extended period of time. There are a lot of myths surrounding that. But what you should all remember is that breastfeeding promotes a feeling of security to the child, and it ensures bonding between the mother and child. So breastfed babies grow up feeling more secure and feeling, knowing their place in the world is, more secure. So it absolutely does not affect any child psychologically in a negative way. And so I'm going to quickly talk about how we can support breastfeeding. All right. So as physicians, so those are some of the myths that I thought of. I think during the Q&A session, you can probably share more myths that you've heard of, or more myths that are propagated as established facts. Okay. We'll talk about that later. And how can we support breastfeeding? So as physicians, what can we do is we can disseminate correct information about breastfeeding. It's very important that we listen to the mother. So what I want to talk about is, until the mother is expecting the child, there's a lot of attention given to the mother and mother's concerns are heard of. And after mother has given birth to the child, nobody really is so concerned about the mother. It's always about the child. But the mother is not as given as much importance as the mother was before. So I think it's very important that we listen to mothers, ask them what their concerns are, and motivate and encourage them. And as physicians, we need to reassure them that they're doing a good job. Okay. And as long as the child is maintaining a good weight on the percentile, on the growth chart, if the child does not have to be, even if the child is on the 3rd percentile, but if it's consistently the same way, as long as it's not dropping, I think we should support breastfeeding and tell the mother, you're doing a good job, carry on. All right. And refer mothers to lactation consultants when they find it difficult. So I think we should not be under the notion that we know best because we're physicians, but lactation consultants work very closely with mothers. They watch how mothers breastfeed and tell them how to be comfortable while breastfeeding as well. So it's important that whole families get involved in breastfeeding. It's not just the mother's job. And at home, so I'm talking about what we can do for mothers as physicians, but here we have a mix of I think males, females in this particular forum. And I think you should remember that we can all do our bit. You know, as family members, we can encourage and support the mother in various ways, ensure that she has a comfortable home environment. So if a mother wants to come out, watch TV and breastfeed her child, please let her feel comfortable. Don't let her think that she has to sit in a room, cover herself up and only then breastfeed. Ensure that she's comfortable in her own home. And I think as members of family, we can help with other household chores. Maybe breastfeeding takes a lot of time, and it's not something that just gets done with, and you can't just remove the child from the breast immediately. So just ensure that the mother has help with household chores. And for families or for caregivers, for other the fathers, if they don't feel involved in childcare, what you can do is help in other ways. So if you think breast milk is enabling the mother and the child to bond and they feel left out, you can ensure that you carry the child, burp the child after so that the mother can continue to rest. You can burp the child. You can help in changing soiled diapers. So those are ways at which we can support breastfeeding. And at the workplace. So you're all going to be physicians who will be working alongside breastfeeding mothers at some point in time. So we can have policies that support breastfeeding, have flexible scheduling, have nursing breaks. So where the mother can go feed the child if the child is in daycare, or mother can go express milk if required. Have privacy for, so if you've seen, please look around in your own institutions and see, is there privacy for breastfeeding mothers? Do they have a room where they can go and take a break, where they can go express milk? Is it there? Is there a clean storage space for storing up express milk? So if a mother is working, the mother will need to store the milk until the mother gets back home. So is there a refrigerator or a space for that? And does the mother have adequate maternity leave, childcare leave? And is it possible to provide childcare facilities? So these are things we need to keep in mind so that we can support breastfeeding with the mother at the workplace. So that's all the information I have to give you, but I want to talk to you about my journey actually. So that's me and my son. And I continue to breastfeed him, but I can say I was very, very unprepared even as a community physician to initiate my breastfeeding journey. So I was still on my labor table when the nurse brings me, my son to me and asked me to breastfeed him. So I wasn't even prepared. I didn't know that it happens. I'm still on my labor table and my child is brought to me. So I still had my apprehensions, and nobody had told me anything except what I had read probably in community medicine and pediatrics. And I don't think it did me any good. So I had the nursing staff who was such a great help. So I physically couldn't hold the baby. They held the baby for me and they helped me initiate breastfeeding. And but the first 1 month was pretty nightmarish because I didn't know what to expect. My child would be with me the whole night. I had sleepless nights and I was really drained, and the breastfeeding sessions would go on for an hour. And I had my physician actually tell me, after 20 minutes, remove the child from your breast. A child who is just dozing off to sleep on your breast, you remove the child will wake up, and then again it's going to lead to more sleepless nights, and you don't understand why breastfeeding sessions are going for an hour. So, but this is a very, very normal thing. Okay, so in the first 1 month when the child is still learning to latch, breastfeeding sessions do take very long, like an hour. And they say the breastfeeding interval, we have two kinds of breastfeeding practices that we do. We do either breastfeeding on demand or we do timed feeds. So timed feeds for a newborn, the recommendation is that you feed every 2 hours once. So people's idea is if you start breastfeeding at 10 o'clock, and even if you finish by 11 o'clock, it doesn't mean you start breastfeeding again at 1 o'clock. It's 10. If you started at 10, it means 2 hours from that time. So again, you start breastfeeding at 12. So you barely have any time between your breastfeeding sessions. So you're constantly with the child, and which means that you have pretty much, the child is breastfeeding up to 12 times in a day, which means you're always with the child, breastfeeding the child. And very often we forget to tell the mother that it's breastfeeding and not nipple feeding. So if the child's latch is not proper, and if the child is sucking at the nipple, I think that needs to be corrected. So I think went through all those issues. I ended up one day waking up with a temperature of 104. And that was so unexpected. I don't know. I didn't have any kind of infections. This was almost a month later into my breastfeeding journey. I wake up with 104 temperature, just to realize I have a big lump in my breast. And it was already pretty bad. So I have had a clogged duct, which I never realized. And I had no knowledge about how to go about it. I tried to remove the clogged duct forcefully, which ended up in me getting mastitis as well. So so much for a person talking about breastfeeding, I've also suffered from mastitis. So which meant frequent trips to the doctor, and being advised incision and drainage, which meant a lifelong scar, and I wouldn't be able to breastfeed my child on that side of the breast. So many doubts in my head. So, but luckily, without any kind of a procedure, the mastitis subsided. I actually developed an abscess. The abscess also with antibiotics tended to go away. And after that, every time, even when I was sick with my abscess, everybody asked me, so will the child have enough breast milk now? Nobody asked me, are you feeling well? The question is, will the child have enough breast milk? And, you really, it was kind of very hard at that time. So to say, I know I am more interested to ensure better nutrition for my child. So, and after 3 months, by then it settled. And I got into this wonderful group called Breastfeeding Support for Indian Mothers. So it's a social media group, and it has a few doctors, physicians in it, but it's mostly other mothers who are supporting each other. And you realize they have the wealth of knowledge that we don't have. So they had answers to so many queries, and I never in my world knew that if you're having a letdown, you're going to have pain while you're having letting down. So breastfeeding is not like a very enjoyable experience. It's painful. So till it gets established. And they never told me that there was something called as oversupply, where your child starts choking on your breast milk because there's just an overflow. So which gets regulated only by around 3 months, 4 months, when the child's demand and the mother's supply get regulated with each other. So these are things I never read in my book. Okay, so I think I want to tell you all about that. And even beyond 6 months, the whole question was, when are you going to start weaning off your child? So, and there's the whole idea that you start giving 5 meals to a child once a child has become 6 months. But again, remember, breastfeeding is the most important nutrition till the child is 1 year of age. So it has to be, the complementary feeds have to be started gradually. Maybe the first 2 weeks, for the first 1 month, you introduce just 1 meal. Then beyond that, you introduce 2 meals. And only by the end of the year, you're ensuring that the child is on 3 meals and 2 snacks. Things which I never knew had I not been in that particular group. Okay. And yeah, even now, constantly being questioned about, when I should be weaning off my child. So I just want to say that to establish, okay, and one more thing I want to add is about my workplace as well. To be honest, I didn't think it was possible for me to continue breastfeeding my child beyond 6 months, maybe, not completely with breast milk, but my institution was so helpful to me, and they actually let me take breaks. And luckily we had a refrigerator in the department. So I had this access to express milk, store it, and bring it back for my child as well. So I think we should all be that supportive. And last year, when I coordinated the breastfeeding week, like Aditya said, the first thing I said is I will coordinate it only if I'm allowed to exercise my breastfeeding rights. So there's no point if we talk about breastfeeding and don't be an example. So I would like to really say my department, my college actually enabled me to breastfeed as well. So I've been doing it. But now that my child is 2 years, I keep constantly question about, we all only were able to breastfeed for 3 months, 6 months, you're still doing it. So I think the whole idea is, as physicians, if we don't support it, if we don't promote it and practice it, it's going to be very hard for us to do the same for our own patients. Okay. So that's all I have to share. And I'll be happy to take any questions or any kind of a discussion. I just want this to be very informal. So I hope that helped some of you to come up with some ideas on how we can prepare ourselves better for breastfeeding and how to support mothers as well in the future. So I'm going to stop at that.
Great session, ma'am. If anybody has any questions, you can ask ma'am. Either put it up in the chat box or you can unmute yourself.
If somebody wants to go and ask like a medical question as well, I'm ready to take it. But if you want to know any kind of a question or any kind of myths that you've come across.
Hi, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah, Sana.
Hi, ma'am. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. It was a really great session. I had one doubt. Ma'am, so when you said that the composition of breast milk is like different for each mother, does it depend on the state of the baby, or is it like different for like the mother, and are there any factors that influence that?
Definitely for both the mother and the child as well. So based on how nutritionally the mother is well nourished, except for very, very poorly nourished mothers, most mothers can make good quality breast milk. But again, depending upon the mother's nutrition as well, and depending upon what kind of breast milk obviously is affected by what the mothers consume in certain ways, like to tell breastfeeding mothers not to consume maybe alcohol because that passes through the blood, and even maybe certain drugs pass through blood. So definitely breast milk composition is affected by the mother as well, and by the child's requirement, most definitely. So they've seen that mothers, children, if they're suffering from, like say, infection at any particular time, breast milk is rich in immune factors at that particular point in time. And when children probably have a phase of, like say, acute diarrheal episode, the child requirements are met much better by the breast milk. And when the child has some kind of issue where the child is going through a growing phase. So we all know what's called as growth spurt, right? Growth does not happen linearly in children. Just at the end of 1 month, there's a spurt. And at the end of, so growth occurs in spurts. And during those spurts, the breast milk has a lot more hind milk and it's rich in fats as well. So for each mother and for each child, the composition varies depending on different periods of time as well.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes. Okay, so somebody's asked up to how many months breastfeeding should be continued. So exclusive breastfeeding needs to be continued for 6 months. So nothing but breast milk for the first 6 months. And then it needs to be continued along with complementary feeds for 1 year. And beyond that, so according to WHO recommendation, up to 2 years or beyond if the mother chooses to. So, but the WHO recommendations is a minimum of 2 months. Breastfeeding to be continued for 2 years. Yeah, 2 years.
Ma'am, you spoke about oversupply of breast milk. So like, I mean, I haven't heard a lot about it, but there are milk banks that have come up now. I think there's only one in Bangalore. So could you tell us a little bit about that, ma'am, as to like who's eligible to donate?
All right. And it's not necessarily mothers who have oversupply. All mothers can contribute to the milk bank actually. So any milk bank will take milk if the mother is less than 6 months in the less than 6 months period of lactation actually. So what mothers can do is most mothers can produce more milk than actually what's required for the child. So what can be done is when the mother's feeding on one side, if the mother, you have various devices actually where you can just fix like a pump or a collector, even keeping even a bowl on the other side of the breast, because there's always leakage of breast milk from the other side when feeding on one side. So that can be collected, stored and donated, or can be used for your own child for a later time. And if mothers have to, so it's usually not recommended to express or pump milk in the first 3 or 4 months before the mother's supply is regulated. Otherwise, it can lead to oversupply issues. It can lead to clogging of pores. It can lead to, again, abscesses, mastitis and abscesses and all that. So usually we do not, unless required, we do not advise mothers to express milk for the first 3 or 4 months till it's regulated. So, but mothers who do have to pump and who have excess storage or supply more than what their child requires, or even if they can spend one session trying to pump a little bit more, because in one session a mother might be able to make up to 100 ml. For a premature infant, the requirement will be hardly 10 ml, but one mother can for a day maybe contribute as much as 100 ml more. So it can benefit 10 babies. So the mother, but there are strict procedures in the way you actually donate milk to a milk bank. So both the milk bank will ensure the blood tests are done on the donor mother, and only then it will, mother has to label the stored milk properly, on which date, what time it was taken, and how old is the child of the lactating mother, so that for what age the breast milk will cater to. And then the breast milk bank the milk bank itself can come and collect it as well. I think the one milk bank that is there is at Fortis in Bangalore.
Okay.
So yeah, that's the usual procedure for how you approach a milk bank. So I had actually tried to reach out because I was also expressing for my child. And but then my son was already beyond 6 months when I started expressing. So then they said, you have to be in the first 6 months only you can express and donate to a breast milk bank.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so there is a question in the chat. Breast milk enhancing diet or supplements? Okay, so yeah, this is something. Oh, there are quite a few questions, I think.
4 questions.
So let me come one by one. Can somebody read out the first?
Yeah, I'll read it out for you, ma'am. How long does it take for the breast to stop producing milk after weaning?
If it is done gradually, if mothers stop, so again, important to remember that weaning is not an abrupt process. It has to be done very, very gradually. You stop one feed at a time. So you stop one feed, and so if a child who say maybe 1 year or 1.5 years or 2 years is feeding say 3 or 4 times in a day, you want to first skip one feed, continue it for 1 or 2 weeks, and then drop the next feed. So if you keep doing that, the breast, you don't have a problem with engorgement, or those issues don't occur. And it's very surprising that mothers, even after stopping breastfeeding for a month or 2, might still find breast milk being produced in the breast. So it could vary. So it may not ever stop producing milk, might take quite a long period of time. So it's a very individualistic, but weaning process has to be gradual so as to counter the engorgement issues.
So our next question is, ma'am, please tell us about bifidus factor present in breast milk.
Bifidus factor present in breast milk. Okay. So something that I didn't read about each individual factor. Okay. I'll have to come back to that. Okay, because I didn't read up about each immune factor specifically, but
I'll go to the next question.
Vineet, can I address your question at a later time? I will read up about it and I will come back to you on that. Okay, so
our next question is, do awareness programs working consistently for breastfeeding in our country, and how can it be contributed? How can we contribute more for public awareness?
Public awareness, okay. So we do have a lot of awareness programs that are going on now. And it's actually so surprising that we need to have awareness programs to promote breastfeeding. But we have the breastfeeding hospital, baby friendly hospital initiative, the BFHI, which actually has ensures that in hospitals there's no marketing of infant milk substitutes, that mothers are given support services in the hospital. So there's a 10-step initiative that needs to be there on a constant everyday basis. So it's not like an awareness program, but it's a constant presence that is there to promote breastfeeding in our country. So we have many guidelines like the young infant and young child feeding practices, which help to promote breastfeeding. And other than that, the awareness programs are pretty sporadic. And then we have the World Breastfeeding Week, which is mainly promoted by the Breastfeeding Promotion Network of India in our country, which helps to promote breastfeeding. But we should say that still there's a lot more that can be done, because I think most of these organizations that do promote breastfeeding are all don't comprise of pediatricians or physicians. And unless it comes from physicians, people are, it has to come from us mainly, because, a doctor's word is seen as the final word. So if we are not aware, it becomes very, very difficult to convince other people. So I think there's still a long way that we could go. Breast milk enhancing diet or supplements. Yeah, this person asked me. So this is a very common thing, like a lot of foods like beta, and then you have asparagus. You have these supplements as well. It's called Shatavari powder, which is all recommended. I have myself had quite a few of that, and probably that also led to my issue of mastitis and abscess. You're just producing a lot of milk. So unless the mother is, there are quite a few supplements that are present, like even what they give you at home can enhance breast milk. And there are other supplements that you can get and have as well. But unless the mother is really finding it difficult to cope up with producing breast milk, these should not be recommended, because it can lead to issues of oversupply. So there are a lot of lactation laddus, lactation, there are many such things available. So I think there are quite a few. So usually it's the content mainly in all of this is asparagus. So how does breastfeeding prevent breast cancer? Okay, so how does breastfeeding prevent breast cancer? So again, I have to read at the molecular level. I'll make note of these FAQs. I have to maybe go deep down to explain the mechanism. Maybe you can pass it to the participants here. I'm sorry, yes. I'm not prepared on the mechanism of action, if this factor and all that. I will let you know. Okay, how can breastfeeding breast milk be brought to the desirable temperature? So first thing that you should remember, that expressed breast milk should never be shaken. The breast milk is not homogenized. Like if you see, if the milk packets that we buy at home, they'll say homogenized pasteurized milk. So all the contents come, they're all mixed together. But if you see breast milk that is expressed, you will see a layer of fat on top, and then you will see the water contents there. But the idea should never be to shake it, because it destroys the immune factors and other nutritional factors present in breast milk. So what you need to do is, even if it's been frozen, so usually you can freeze it and keep it for up to 6 months, a year as well, if it's frozen in the right temperature. So what you need to do is you can take a vessel of hot water and just gently, stir it in the hot water. That's what needs to be done. The bottle can be, that way you bring it down to room temperature before feeding it. Okay. So no other way. Don't heat. Breast milk should never be heated directly, which again destroys the factors present in breast milk. Okay, so 2 things that I will actually work on, and I'll get back to today. So to Vineet and the other members of the forum as well. To Hafsa as well. Okay. Any other questions anybody has? I'm so sorry, Hafsa and Vineet, that I've not prepared with those questions.
Ma'am, we have a question now.
What psychological factors present in rural area that leads to wasting of the colostrum? Okay. So what kind of psychological factors are present? So I think there's this whole idea that the colostrum is impure. And there's also this whole feeling that before feeding colostrum, if actually in many rural areas, the whole idea is, if you've seen mothers, I've seen it's a common practice that they're wearing sweaters, they're wearing woolen caps, even in the middle of summer. And on top of it, they don't get enough water as well. You just dehydrate the mother. And hydration is very important for the mother to be producing breast milk. You need to be adequately hydrated as well. So again, then the whole idea that the colostrum is impure, you're not seeing enough output because it's a very small quantity, leads to families not probably, feeding colostrum. And the whole idea of prelactal feeds starting maybe, I've personally with my eyes seen children being fed tea. I mean, a newborn. So there are whole practice of giving honey, sugar water, donkey's milk. So maybe we'll have to read up about what really happens in rural areas. What is their thought process to give all of that? Interesting, but because it's something that I also need to find out.
Does anybody have any other questions? You can unmute and ask as well.
Yeah. Please go ahead and ask. But I want to personally apologize. I feel so inadequate talking to Hafsa and Vineet. I will read up.
Hello, ma'am. This is Hafsa.
Hafsa, I will read about breast cancer and let you know.
No, ma'am. I just want to know, how does it reduce the chance of a female getting breast cancer? I've just read it in the books.
Hafsa, at the molecular level, how it actually prevents breast cancer is something even it's something that you've made me think about as well. So I'll go back and I will read and I will enlighten you on that. I don't have a ready answer for that.
Okay, ma'am, no problem.
Is there somebody else? I would like to hear from all of you about what and all you have heard about breastfeeding. I'd also like to know, expand because there are 70 participants here today. So I want to know, I'm sure you all wanted to listen to something in particular, or you had some ideas. So I'd like to listen to all of you.
So I'll just start.
Okay.
So what I had heard was one of the myths you told, the baby's, the breast milk will kind of indicate whatever the mother had taken. And if at all the child develops any kind of stomach pain, like bloating, it could be because of what the mother consumed.
Mother ate.
Yeah. So it's again, the mother's blame because, you didn't eat a proper diet.
Yeah. So what they say, if children have colic, the child turns over by itself at around 4 months or 5 months, the child is rolling over. Even before that, they say as soon as the child is born, all children need to be given tummy time. So that reduces the incidence of colic in children. So supervised, you put the child in the prone position and, that is supposed to help children with colic. Okay, in case of death of mother, if mother is not ready to breastfeed at all, how to feed such children. So there are, options like earlier days we had wet nursing where you employed people to nurse instead of the mother. Or if, okay, I told you about this breastfeeding support group, right? I should tell you about what kind of a network it is. So there are cases, especially with the COVID-19 situation, so many times when you hear there's been a death of a mother, the child is in the NICU or the child is with the family and we don't have access to breast milk. And so mothers have come and said, we will donate our breast milk. So expressed milk from other mothers can also help. And if there are two mothers in a household at the same time, also, and if one of the mothers is unable to breastfeed or one of the mothers can offer to breastfeed the other child as well. And there are studies which say that, tandem feeding, like if children, once mothers have their second children, or if they're feeding two children of different age groups, their own or others, the breast milk, if they tend to feed from one breast exclusively for one child and from the other breast for the other child, the breast milk from each breast, the composition is also different. So it's tailor-made for each of those children as well. So you can have other mothers who are willing to breastfeed the child. You can approach a milk bank. For up to 6 months children, they will provide milk. The milk bank will provide donor milk. Okay, so you can get it from there. Or if that is also not possible, safe methods of formula milk can be given, So if as an alternative to breast milk. But the problem with formula milk is very often people do not know how to dilute formula milk. And in poor families where they don't have enough money, actually breast milk, if you get 1 tin of formula feed, it gets over in like 4 days if given properly. But people can't afford that much. I think 1 kg would be around 500 rupees. And families can't afford to spend 1,000 rupees each week on purchasing formula feeds. So then they tend to dilute it and give very little so that it lasts longer. So, and the whole process of, sterilizing each of the bottles used is required. So as a last resort, you can always, there's no need to shame mothers who formula feed, but as much as possible, we need to encourage breastfeeding. So those are the alternatives that are there if a mother is unable to breastfeed or the mother is not there. Who's never been pregnant to lactate breastfeed. Okay, so Zora, actually I'll tell you that lactation consultants, especially for mothers who've families who've adopted children, can, if they're very keen to breastfeed, they can initiate lactation. But they say it may not be like a full-blown lactation. You will have to give formula feeds, but the mother can still have the satisfaction of trying to breastfeed, and lactation to a very small extent can be initiated in those mothers as well. So all that would involve is constant skin to skin and trying to attempt the child to latch frequently. So very interesting cases where mothers have failed to breastfeed, the grandmothers also take those children and breastfeed them. So that is even after years of stopping breastfeeding, there are you might be able to read quite a few of those grandmothers taking up and breastfeeding their grandchildren. And see, it might seem very absurd, but I've heard stories from some family members where they've known people in their earlier days when they were younger, where they've fed their children for say 5 years. It was a norm to breastfeed children for up to 5 years, until they went to school. So now I think with the whole very negative thing given to connotation given to breastfeeding, it has dropped so drastically. Somebody's asked, could breastfeeding to multiple infants at the same time weaken the mother? So obviously breastfeeding means nutrition from the mother is being passed on to the child, but it does not weaken. For any breastfeeding mother, the mother needs to have a balanced diet. The mother needs to be on calcium supplementation as long as she breastfeeds. And for the first 6 months or the first 1 year of following her delivery, a mother will need to take iron supplements as well. So supplementation, good diet is required, but per se it doesn't weaken the mother. What are the benefits for a mother breastfeeding? Okay, so for a mother as such, it has shown to reduce postpartum, which is a very, very taboo topic. People don't recognize postpartum depression, but it has shown that breastfeeding actually reduces postpartum depression in the mother. It does reduce the incidence of breast cancer and ovarian cancer. Ovarian cancer because you are inducing some kind of a lactational amenorrhea where the ovaries are not functioning at that point in time, which helps the, avoids the, thereby it prevents ovarian cancer as well. The whole hormonal axis, the way it acts. But again, if you go to minute molecular, I'll have to find out. But it prevents the mother against osteoporosis as well, because there is a constant removal of calcium from the bones and a relaying of that calcium. So it actually strengthens the bones and it prevents against cardiovascular disease in mothers as well, because of the hormonal balance that is brought about by breastfeeding. Yeah, so it psychologically, it helps, like I already mentioned, it helps the mother lose weight. I actually have to say I lost my entire pregnancy weight of 15 kg while breastfeeding, which I did gain back, but yes, I did lose weight. But not all mothers will lose that weight actually. It's not necessary that they do. And yeah, it helps as an additional mechanism, like as a contraception, but not a very reliable one. Can a nulliparous woman produce milk without additional hormonal therapy? Yes. So I think I would also probably have read about how this mechanism works on relactation and inducing lactation in mothers who adopt children. But nulliparous women can also can lactate. And what is here? What has Medha asked? What's the mechanism behind change in composition of depending on corresponding requirements in the baby? So actually, I'll tell you, if you see a mother who holds her child next to her often, you are having constant contact with the child's body, and the kind of bacterial flora that is present both in the mother and the child is very, very, very similar. So a mother who holds the child also tends to kiss the child often, is always, if you've seen that, that's a very constant thing. So that thereby the mother is also imbibing the same bacterial flora, and thereby the mother is able to produce, if there's an infection that is likely imminent to happen to the child, that, the mother is already producing antibodies towards that for the child. So that is how, in some way, it becomes tailor-made. And how it, how during growth spurts, I told you there's more fatty milk, because during growth spurts, the child who is probably 6 months old, who was on 12 feeds, has come down to 8 feeds. And suddenly at the 6 month, 8 month mark, the child is again breastfeeding like a newborn. So it looked like the child is not satiated at the breast at all. So the child is constantly sucking, which in turn, every time the breast is completely empty, the breast refills. So that way, the breast keeps getting these signals that there's a need for more production of breast milk. So that is how the breast milk composition keeps changing. The child's actions will enable the mother to produce appropriate breast milk as well. I hope that clarifies.
Another question. How long can expressed milk be stored, and what are the precautions one must take?
Okay. How long? Expressed milk, which is stored in room temperature, like you just express it and leave it out, can be fed up to 4 hours. After 4, but once the child has put it in the mouth, because as you know, it can get contaminated with the saliva of the child, and again there is bacterial contamination. So you have to ensure that that breast milk is finished within 4 hours. And the breast milk, need not be discarded. It can be used for bathing the child, and that breast milk is usually used for those kind of purposes as well. And if it is kept in the refrigerator, it can be used stored for up to 48 hours. So for up to a day or 2, you can keep it and give it to the child. If it is kept in the freezer at like proper frozen, it can be stored even up to 3 to 6 months. So express milk. Do they have anything more to ask? What precautions must be taken? Okay, so you have to ensure that when you're storing breast milk, it's in a safe and it's a safe container. And if usually we ask mothers to separate breast milk. If a mother has expressed and she has like 200 ml of milk from a day, we say separate it out. There are something called that breast milk storage bags where you can just put 30-40 ml of milk and just freeze it and keep it. So whenever the child requires, the date is there on it. You say, okay, you take whatever you put it in first, you can remove it and you can feed the child as well. So you have to ensure that it's hygienic, that you're not touching the surfaces, that these storage bags come sterilized. So you have to ensure that you don't contaminate it. And yeah, those are the precautions. Clean it well, ensure it's dry. How can leaky breast be prevented, taken care of? Okay, so there's nothing I think you can do to prevent leaky breast unless you feed your child before your breast fills up. So, but you have breast pads which you can wear, which will ensure that there's no obvious leakage. What the mother can do is, if she feels engorged, just needs to go and express a little. So that ensures that there's not a leak, but there's no overt leak as such. If the mother just expresses a little when she's feeling engorged. So that's what can be done.
There's another question. If the mother has HIV, can she breastfeed her infant?
Okay. So the current recommendation is that HIV is transmitted through breast milk, that we know. But when what we have to remember is, why is HIV, how does the child acquire HIV even though it's transmitted through milk? So a child who is fed mixed feeds, who has both complementary, cow's milk or formula feeds and has breast milk, that is the child who's at risk of getting HIV transmission, at acquiring HIV infection. If the child is only exclusively breastfed, the proteins in the breast milk do not damage the infant's gut. So therefore, the HIV particles won't be absorbed into the bloodstream of the child. Whereas if the child is having a complex protein like cow's milk, that can injure, cause microabrasions in the gut of the child, and then the HIV particles can be, acquired, can be transmitted into the bloodstream of the child. So if the child is on, you either put the child completely on formula feeds, or you put the child only on exclusive breastfeeding, but never mix both breast milk and formula feeds of cow's milk for a mother who's got HIV infection. So then the risk of transmission is reduced. And especially in low income settings where mothers are not able to afford, or where the survival of children is at stake, it's always preferable to encourage breastfeeding, because mortality due to other infections is very high compared to acquiring HIV infection. And for mothers who choose to exclusively breastfeed their children who are HIV positive, they need to abruptly wean. So at 6 months, completely cut off breast milk and start on other feeds. So that is how you ensure that HIV transmission is reduced in children who are being breastfed.
There's another question.
Will the breast get filled with milk within 2 hours after the child being fed? It will. So this is a, as the breast keeps being emptied, the breast keeps getting filled. It's not even 2 hours. It's not even a process where you completely empty the breast and then feed. Even after the end of the breastfeeding session, there's always breast milk in the breast. So a child can almost remove with efficiency 90% of the breast milk in a breast, but it immediately gets refilled. Okay, and if using electric pumps, we can remove about 70% of, with 70% efficiency, breast milk can be removed. With manual pumps, maybe around 50%. Hand expression, maybe a little lesser than that. But breast is never empty. Any other questions?
Mom, I had a question. A lot of people use gripe water when their babies develop colic and stuff.
Aishwarya,
what are your thoughts on that?
Can you repeat the question? I don't know if your voice was breaking off for me.
Yeah, can you hear me now, Mom? Yeah, so a lot of parents use gripe water to prevent colic in their children. So is that safe to be given?
So initially in earlier days, if you saw gripe water was mainly had some components of a little bit of alcohol in it. So which would put the kind of child to sleep, or, so gripe water now is completely discouraged. So ideally, because when we say exclusive breastfeeding, so it also excludes gripe water. So gripe water is not required for colic, and actually having a good latch will ensure that the child is not sucking in much air during the breastfeeding, and therefore the problems of colic actually reduces if the latch is good. So gripe water is not required. A lot of tummy time should help children.
Thank you, Mom. There's another question. If at all the neonate passes away, what can be done to manage
engorged breast? Okay, so we have a lot of, I think Kruti was also the one who asked about supplements, I think. So, just like how you have galactogogues to enhance breast milk supply, there are also, we have tablets to stop breast milk as well. I'm not sure exactly which ones those are, but we do have. So we have medications which enable breast milk to be immediately stopped as well. And at homes, actually what they can advise is, even when you have engorged breast, they advise cabbage leaves to be kept on the breast, which prevents cabbage leaves, or even jasmine flowers Okay, those are supposed to, I don't know how that acts, but that is actually supposed to reduce the engorgement. And we have medications to completely stop breast milk supply as well.
Anybody, any other questions?
Ma'am?
Yeah, yes, Yogendra.
I couldn't understand the last question, what they've asked.
Oh, what they're trying to ask is, if a child has passed away, the mother is still going to be continuing lactation, right? She will continually produce breast milk. So then what do you do? If the mother's breast milk is not, if the milk supply is not stopped, it might lead to, engorgement and all the complications of engorgement that comes with it. So for that, how do you abruptly stop the breast milk supply? Eventually when the child is not there, it will stop. But the initial engorgement and for the first few days when the breast milk keeps coming, how are you going to stop that? And, in breastfeeding mothers, what can happen is, even if you don't have your own child, if you hear another child crying, the breast will start automatically leaking. So for a breast to be initiated, it's just the feeling of having a child that needs to be there. So for
like
that,
condition reflex.
Yeah, kind of like that. You hear that and then you're stimulated to immediately it takes over. Yeah. So what you can do is, if you need to stop breastfeeding, they want to know what to do about that.
Yes.
Yeah. How to treat nipple cuts and fissures, very, very important to know. So, if there are nipple fissures, you have nipple creams, which you can apply, and just before feeding the child, wipe off the cream, and then you can do, and even simple things like put ghee on it can hasten the, healing. And the best thing is after the child, and, feeding a child with fissure and cuts is really terrible because it's very, very, very painful. You'll be literally screaming in pain. So what you can do is, even after a feeding session, just put a little bit of the hind milk on the breast and allow it to air dry. The fissures and cuts heal very fast. And you also have other kinds of ointments and nipple creams to avoid those fissures as well. That is also available.
I think we're done.
So,
if anybody has anything, we can continue. Otherwise, we can wind up the session.
Ma'am, actually, I can just see like so many questions regarding that, right? Okay, can the mothers express the milk and donate it to the milk bank after death of the baby? They could, but it'll become very, very difficult for a mother to manage. You don't have your child, but there are mothers who've done it, but it can be very difficult emotionally for the mother. And also when you don't have a child, just the thought of, okay, I'm going to do good to everybody and therefore I'm going to express might become very, very difficult. But if they do have initial breast milk, at least that initial phase, you can express it and have it donated. That can be done. But to have it as a continuous process, I don't think it's very feasible, actually.
Okay, so I'll just make a small announcement. In the meantime, if anybody has questions, you can put it up on the chat box. So for the event, we'll be sharing a post-event form. I think Sana will put it up on the chat box. So what we need you guys to do is to get your certificates. You can fill this form up tomorrow. But before that, we need you to share a few posters that have been made. It'll be shared on the groups that we have created. And yeah, we want you to share them on your social media platforms, because I think we definitely need to spread awareness about this, and that is a really good way to go about it. So we definitely want you to share those posters on your social media handles. And tomorrow, I think before it disappears from your stories, you can take a screenshot of it and upload it on the forms and fill in your details, and you'll be getting your certificates.
I would be happy to receive feedback on the session as well.
Yes, ma'am, that's put in the form.
Yeah. So,
any other questions? Anybody?
Okay, so if there are no further questions, I just want to tell all of you that, actually I'm very, very passionate about this whole, and if I know my students would actually vouch that I always take the postnatal case during the blog posting, because it means so much to me that, because I didn't have that access to that information. And even after being trained so much, I mean, I can tell you, unless we are, physically there. And I can tell you, one of my postgraduates who currently has an infant, I had put her with this breastfeeding support group. I had joined her to the group, and then she told me, "Ma'am, that's the best present I think a mother can get." So I was so happy that she was able to do that. And one of my juniors from college, I had also introduced her to the group, and she's a clinician. She happened to continue breastfeeding, express, and feed even in these COVID times for her child. So I think those are the success stories, and it's possible. And I'm also very grateful to be honest, I wasn't aware of the support group, and it was only my sister-in-law and my cousins who actually said, there's something that exists like that. So I was such an ignorant physician, and I was so happy to be part of this group. And in this group, I can tell you, they keep saying, this doctor kept saying this, and they curse doctors. So then I was so happy when Aditi first messaged me and said, "Ma'am, would you like to do the session?" I said yes, because I know as physicians, as future physicians, you're going to make a big difference. And I want you to give the right information to your patients. And I think, we can equip ourselves a little better. So I didn't want to make it into a full theoretical lecture, but more of, what are the questions that we usually come across, and we're not aware of how to handle all that. So I want to really thank the whole coordinating team for, having invited me. So I'm very glad I could actually share it with people. And the amount of questions that came, I'm so happy that actually people listened and they had those doubts as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. So if anybody has any other questions, you can put it up. And meanwhile, I'll go ahead and thank everybody who's made this session a success. So starting with ma'am, thank you so much for taking your time, ma'am. More than all the information you've provided, I think sharing your experience, that is something that has inspired all of us to actually know things, because all we were limited to is probably two pages of PARC and probably OPGHAI, and yeah, that's it, 3 marker and 5 marker. That's all we were limited to. But I think as physicians in the future, or anybody else for that matter, as medical students, we will come across not only our patients, but a lot of relatives who will have so many doubts. And I don't think reading those 2 pages would have helped us answer any of their questions. But after today's session, certainly we will be able to answer much better, and we will be able to support them. That is what is more important. That is what I have learned from this session, at least, because it is important that they are in a safe and secure state of mind to breastfeed. It's already an overwhelming phase in their life. And if at all we're not just saying do it for your child and blaming the mother, it's not going to help with anything. They need to feel safe to do the same. So thank you so much, ma'am, for being here and telling us. And next, I would like to thank our state convener, Mithun, for providing us this opportunity to conduct this session, and our state coordinator, Meghna. Apart from that, I would like to thank Nitin, who's the head of the social media team. And apart from that, Rohit, who helped us with all the posters and all the technical aspects of this webinar. And I would like to also thank Srishti and Karthik for their inputs. Lastly, I would like to thank, this Aditya and Sana, who basically coordinated this entire event. And lastly, but definitely the most important part of this event for the participants, I'm really thankful for all your participation and enthusiastic participation and asking so many questions, because I'm sure if whatever questions you have asked, all of us had the same in our mind, but probably didn't flash at that time. So thank you so much for participating. Thank you so much, ma'am. I think Mithun would like to say a few words.
Yeah, initially, ma'am, thanks a lot for accepting our invitation and coming. It was really a very great and a valuable session, ma'am, because in the current scenario, these are the topics which has to be dealt with, because awareness around these topics are those which makes everything fine. So we are very much grateful to you, ma'am. And in addition to that, to the organizers, Aishwarya, Sana, and Aditya, we are very grateful for coming up with such a great event. And I'm all grateful to all the participants from our IMIMS in Karnataka, as well as from our state working team. We are much grateful to all of you. I'm sure that in a further future days, we'll also be with such wonderful and informative session. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Aishwarya, Sana, and Aditya.
Thank you.
So if there's nothing further, can I thank you so much again. So
thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you for having organized this, to all the organizers from Mithun, Nitin, and everybody that you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So before we end it, I would like all of you to turn on your cameras so that we can take a picture.
Sure.
So all of you participants, please switch on your videos. More people, please.
I think we shot way past time, but then there's so many people still left behind, and it's good to see that. I don't even see this in a class.
Yes, now even the number of doubts that we've had, I think of all the webinars I've attended, this is one of the most doubts I think we've come across at the end of the session.
And if anyone else wants to keep asking questions, I'm happy to oblige anytime. You guys have my contacts.
We'll share it on the groups now.
Sure.
So can you all just turn it on for a minute? It's my half screen is only with videos. The rest is not. Just take one picture. Okay. 3, 2, 1. I'll just take one more. Okay. 3, 2, 1, go. Done. Yeah, that's it. Share your contact number on the group. Sana, can you just share the pictures that they have to share on the groups, because a few of them are texting me. They want to know what they have to exactly do. So just share them on the group so that they can share the same.
It's on the WhatsApp group.
Yeah, share it on the WhatsApp groups.
Sana, can we end the meeting?
Yeah, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.